Obviously, I'm underneath the motor right now. Okay, this one here is number 5, the one that's broken. And you can see daylight right there through the top because remember that piston came apart and the aluminum part is already out of there. The cast iron part is still down below. We're going to go have a look at what's in the pan here in a minute. These bolts I got to take off, of course, and knock this rod out. I'm going to take them out 2 at a time. I got to rotate the engine. I'll just get the ones I can get to first and knock them out of there. Since I got the truck jacked up, I jacked it up so I can get the pan off easier while having to take the pump off. When it was so cold and windy last night and it was getting dark, I just jacked it up with those 2 air jacks and then pulled the pan out. Set the pan down over here, had it upside down draining. There is a lot of metal in this pan. I don't know what it is. This, of course, is the valve. But that's iron. That's heavy. There's pieces here that I don't recognize, but this is new to me. I have not been inside of one of these motors before. I was a car mechanic. For years, and I know what to look for in there, but that's all iron. I'm not even finding hardly any aluminum. If there is any, here's a piece of sheet metal that's mangled. I don't know what that is, but it's got a shape on it like it's part of the where the pin would go, the wrist pin. We'll find out what's going on here. Still not convinced that I can't put it back together. We should find all that out today. Now that it's jacked up, I can't stand on the tire without it spinning, so I just went on and tightened up the brake on it so that it's not going to turn now, and I put a couple of blocks down here as a stepping stool so I can get back up there. And now up here, we don't have any ring ridge that I can feel at all on number 5. And the reason it was hard to pull number 5 out with the excavator when I put the hook inside the hole in the piston was because the ridge was carboned up. The rest of these are carboned up. It feels like they have a ridge, but I'm hoping none of them really have a ridge. I'm hoping that's just carbon on there, and I'll scrape that off with a knife before I knock these pistons out, because this one was hard to get out. That ridge of carbon came off with the rings when I yanked it out with the excavator. So we'll scrape the rest of these off with a knife. I just took a putty knife and held the edge of it up against the side of the grinding wheel to put a sharp square edge on it. Otherwise it'd be rounded just from old wear and tear. So with that sharp square edge it should work. And I'm gonna just take it and go around these with that and do the cleaning that way. I just pulled all the bolts on my oil pump. This end here, I'm just going to guess that that's a relief valve, so if the pressure's too high on a cold morning, the excess oil pressure will blow out of that back into the pan instead of blowing out seals up above. I'm pretty sure about has to be that. This piece here, I do not know what that is. I'll have to look in the book and see what that is. And I took all the bolts out, and the front 2, I screwed them back in part way. I didn't take them out all the way because I have a suspicion that when I pull this thing loose that a bunch of oil is going to dump out of there. And so I got a drain pan that caught all my bolts, and I'm going to pull that thing out. I can't do it on camera, but I'm just saying that's what I'm doing because I don't want to get an oil bath, and I have a pretty good idea that's what's going to happen here. It's a bunch of oil's going to come out. Not much oil came out of the oil pump, but the pressure relief valve is dripping. It didn't come off when I pulled on it. I just had to tap on it with a hammer and knock it sideways, and it broke the gasket loose. When that dripping slows down a little bit more, I'm going to stick a screwdriver up in there and pry it on off. And we're getting a pretty good run of oil coming out of there. I'm glad I put the pan under it. Shouldn't really have a whole, I guess there shouldn't be any oil coming out the oil pump end. It should all come out this end because that's where the oil goes up from. I don't think it goes up from the oil pump end. I just found out that that pressure relief valve will just spin on the end of that pipe. I turned it and pulled it down, and now a whole bunch of oil came out of it. It'll probably just slip right off of there. I'm pretty sure it will. Got it off. Didn't get too much oil on me. Just dumped it in the upside down in the pan here. That thing is heavy. It weighs probably, I don't know, 20 pounds, maybe more. And this piece here just about has to be another relief valve. I'm not sure why, but it's directly underneath one of my main cap bolts, so it has to come off. I'm going to knock that off right now. And I tapped that with a hammer and broke that gasket loose. That thing's running a lot of oil out of there too. Yeah, it has to be a relief valve. There's my oil pump assembly, and there's not too terribly much oil in there. But then this thing has been draining for a week. The hole where that second relief valve was up there by itself, I just stuck a piece of paper towel in the hole because it just keeps dripping, and I got to get to work here. Got these nuts off. Number 5 here, we're going to knock that one out first, so I can call the machine shop. On the car, I just tapped the side of these caps with a hammer and they pop right off, but I don't really have that kind of accessibility here, so I'll put the nuts back on there, finger tight, but not quite where where they're not going to come down all the way. And I'm going to use a brass hammer or a copper. This hammer here has got copper inside of it that's softer than steel, so it's highly unlikely it'll mushroom anything on that. So I'm going to try to knock those. Hopefully it won't just knock the bolts out of the piston, but it'll knock the piston up off the rod there, and then the cap should just drop right down then. I got that number 5 out. I just reached in the top and pulled it out, but first I rotated the motor around to the top. I made sure that the inserts that are on the rod side, not the cap side, the caps are off on number 5 and number 2 because they were down when I took the caps off. And then I rotated the motor and got them up so that they're close to the top, and now I'm going to just push. This is where the jack leg side of me comes into play. I'm going to use a wooden stick on the bottom of the rod because I don't know what else to do, and I'm going to push that out of there. Well, I have to tap on it with a hammer, and I'm going to knock that out of there. See if we can see where I'm at here. There's my crankshaft, and there's my bolts to the piston rods, and I'm just going to use this and knock that out of there. I'm going to try. Hopefully it'll work. That worked. Just about 4 or 5 hits and it was out of there. So all I got to do is go up on top and pull it out. Here we are up on top. I think I can do this with one hand. There we go. Now the bottom, the caps, of course we'll go over this one and put it back together, have an arrow on it, and they're pointing towards the cam side of the engine. I looked at some videos that someone else did. An engine shop made some videos. They described it as the arrow pointing towards the cam side. With that, the other trick is this little locking tab for your inserts has to be on the same side. If you look over here, this is the hole where my fingernail is. That's the hole where the locking tab or tang or whatever they want to call it. And then over here on this side, excuse me, on this side you'll see a little oil stain. That's where the mating side was on the cap. So both those sides always go on the same side. If there's any confusion as to which way they got to go back in. Of course on number 5 it's getting new pistons anyway, but still you got to put your caps and rods in the right position. Otherwise, if it goes through a rebuild again, somebody's not going to know which way it was supposed to go if it went in the wrong way. Here's number 5 that broke and came apart. This temporary workbench, it's just a oil pan. It's got oil in it. When I drain the oil out of the motor, Here's the top end of it. Of course, we saw that when it was in the motor. And I do have a suspicion that I may have to change. I know I'm going to have to change the pin. The rod, I don't know yet. It was hard getting these caps off. I don't know why. The caps came off, but the bolts were stuck. Maybe they're bent, but what I got to do is torque this thing down, put the bolts back in, torque it down. Doesn't have to be torqued completely tight because there's no bearing crush in there. It's just going to be metal to metal. It's got to be well seated, and then I got to mic this out on the inside in several places and make sure it's within whatever the tolerances are. If I can't find tolerances on it, I'll just go within, let's say, 0.002. I'm hoping should be good enough. Anyway, having said that, I'm going to put the camera on the tripod for a change. I'm going to pop this bearing out. You see there's my little tang in there. I can't see on the screen on the camera very good. It's sunny out here. So I'll put that over on that side. Excuse me. Put that on this side so that when I push in with my thumbs, this will pop out. That's how I do it on cars. I'm hoping it works the same way on this. Yeah, it does. It just pops right out like that. And then I got to do the same thing on this. I got to put it on the rod and tighten it down and measure inside there, make sure we're within tolerance. I just checked this bore and it came out good. I'm not even going to measure. It's 3 inches and 0.5, almost 0.6. And I'm just watching for thousandths variation, and I'm only finding about between 1 and 2 thousandths variation anywhere I look. I'm coming up on the 90. A couple of spots I might find a 91. So I'm happy with that, and I'm doing it on both sides. I already did it. I'm just showing on the camera with this dial caliper. So that's working, that's good, except for one thing I don't like, is that I had to drive these bolts out really hard, and when I forced them back in, it just scraped the threads down the sides on the outside of them. So I don't know if the bolts are bad or if something is wrong. I'm going to talk to the machine shop about that, but I got to pull this off the pin anyway, the rod off the pin, and so maybe I'm going to find a problem. I may have to do a rod anyway, so we'll find out. Got to do that on all of these when they come out. It's not a big deal to do it. It only takes a few minutes. You don't have to torque them down because there's no crush value or no gasket or nothing. It's just inserts out and steel to steel. So you just snug them down a little bit with the impact and zip them back off. Should be plenty. Good enough. Got all these pistons out, and I crawled up under there with a rod, a metal bar, and I tried to hammer and knock those cylinders out, and they're not coming out, so I'm going to have to make a cylinder puller. The machine shop, they're going to be on vacation until the middle of next week, so I can't do any more anyway other than clean up house, and I'll have to spend the next few days working on making a liner puller. I got all my parts in the garage. Got a lot of cleaning to do. This is Friday evening. The machine shop is not going back to work until Tuesday, so I have to wait till then, but I got all these parts I got to clean up. There's all my pistons, the oil pump, and I got to finish making room in here to do any work. Moved a few things out to get some room. There's the air intake. I still got my oil pan and valve cover outside. I'm thankful to say I did not find anything inside the block that scares me.